So let's take a look at managing folder and file permissions in NTFS using PowerShell. So before we get started, the directory I'll be working with is just the ctemp folder, so I'm going to assign that to the dir variable. And then the first thing we'll take a look at is actually retrieving the ACL on a directory. So we use the Get-ACL commandlet and just give it the path of the directory. And you can see that outputs the path, the owner, as well as the ACL, which it calls access. And to access the access property, we can simply enclose that in parentheses and access using the access using .access. Bam. And that's the same thing as if we piped the output of Get-ACL to the select object commandlet and use the expand property parameter, similar to line 36 here. Same output. But if we wanted to actually make that readable, I would recommend piping it to format table. And that's what we're doing a lot of every time we use Get-ACL here, is using format table. Another couple examples of things we can do with that output is we can use the where object commandlet to filter it. So for instance, here on line 43, if we wanted to filter it for a certain identity reference, so in this case I'm specifying my account, we can see that there is one of those. Or if we wanted to look at ones that are not inherited, so ones that were set directly on the object, we can look for those as well. And we can see that my directory doesn't have any of those. That's good, right? So then to set the ACL, there's a couple of different ways to do it. The first example here, this is the Microsoft example in their documentation. It's a little boring, but it does the trick for an example. We're going to copy the ACL from dog.txt to cat.txt. So here's the current ACL for dog. You can see that it has a FIDO entry. And if we look at cat, we can see that it does not. And so to get the ACL, we use the Get-ACL commandlet and then give it the path to dog.txt and assign it to that ACL variable there. And then to set the ACL on cat.txt, we use the set-ACL commandlet, give it the path of the cat.txt, and then use the ACL object parameter and give it that ACL that we just retrieved. And so now if we look at the ACL on cat.txt, we can see that there is a FIDO entry now. So FIDO can get into the cat text file. If we wanted to just add in one entry or edit it directly without having to have that ACL exist already, we can do that as well. So I've got all the different settings we have to set for them here. So first thing we need to do is define the identity that the entry will be for. So in this case, I'm using FIDO as my example again. And then the level of rights that we're going to use, I'm just using full control, keeping it simple. If we want to look at the other options here, we can actually enumerate that enum using this little commandlet here. And since that is a file system's rights object, it's a .NET thing, we've got a lot of different options here. So you can get really granular if you want to. Just for the sake of this example, we're going to keep it simple with full control. And then the other thing is inheritance and propagation. These two kind of confuse me sometimes. So I've actually just got a quick note in here about what each of those are. So inheritance is just the types of objects it applies to, and then the context of a file system, which is what we're looking at. A container is the folders, and objects are the files. And then propagation controls which generation of child objects that it applies to. So none means that it applies to all. That makes sense, right? Inherit only means it applies only to children and their offspring, not to the target folder. And then no propagate inherit means it applies to the target folder and the target folder's children, but not any further on down the line. And then I've got a link here. This will take you right to Microsoft's matrix for all the different combinations of this inheritance and propagation flags and what the results are. And so then we got to set the type. So this is either allow or deny. And I'm choosing to allow it. And then the last thing here on line 78 is we're actually creating that access control entry by creating a file system access rule object, a .NET object. So we're using the new object commandlet. And then inside the parentheses, you'll notice I've got these all in a very particular order. It's very important to keep it in that order if you want it to work. If you're going to be creating a file system access rule for a file, you're simply going to not include inheritance and propagation because file system access rules for files don't have those flags. So we'll go ahead and create that object. And then so what we want to do with that object, that's simply an entry that's not the actual list. So we'll get the current list from my directory using the Get-ACL commandlet. And then that ACL object has an add access rule method, and we'll use that to add in that entry we just created. And then to actually set that new ACL on that directory, we use the set-ACL commandlet again. And then, but this case, the ACL object is that edited ACL that we just created. And then, so now we can look at the ACL on that directory, and we can see that it now has an entry for FIDO. So then if we wanted to remove an entry, just one entry, we can do that as well. So let's look at that ACL for the cat.txt again. You'll notice that now there's two entries for FIDO. One of them is inherited and one of them isn't. So the inherited one is the one we just created, and the uninherited one is one we copied the first setting of the ACL example. So let's pull that ACL using the Get-ACL commandlet and assign it to the ACL variable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter that the entries in that list for the object that has an identity reference of FIDO and is not inherited. And I'm going to assign that to the ACE variable. And then the ACL object has a remove access rule method as well. And so we'll use that method to remove that entry that we just filtered for. And then of course we will now assign that ACL to that cat.txt file and then validate it using the Get-ACL commandlet again. And so now you can see we're down to just one FIDO entry, and it is the inherited one. That's perfect, that's the one we want. So the last example I have is just kind of bring it together in just a simple script example here. So I'm assuming here that we have a share, so C share. So we have a folder, we have a share. Each of the child folders in that share is the name of a department. So if we can actually look at it here, just to kind of give you an example what my example is. So we look at folders, we can see that I got an HR folder, I've got a new folder that I didn't actually name properly, and I've got a sales folder. Okay, so actually we're going to ignore that new folder because nothing's going to happen to it. And so in this case, I'm setting my domain, I'm setting the rights to modify instead of full control, same inheritance, same propagation, same type as from before. So I got my for each loop here. For each folder, I'm going to be creating the identity, so I'm going to use the folder name because that name correlates to a group in Active Directory. And then I'm going to create my access control entry here. So I've got on line 128 my ACE creation, and I've got all the same things as we did before. And then I'm retrieving the ACL from the folder, I'm adding in that access rule, and then assigning it to the folder too. So if we run this script and include all of our variables that we want to, we should see that we worked on the HR folder, we created the ACE, added the ACE to the ACL, and then applied it. And then the new folder, there's no group in Active Directory called new folder because there's no department called new folder, so that one didn't work. But my sales folder did work as well. So that's just an example of bulk editing ACLs, just using a for each loop, and then get child item to get all my folders up here. That's how you manage permissions in NTFS using PowerShell.